Welcome back. In this video, I'm going to talk about some strategies around corpus curation. Corpus curation that is human-centered, that is, that has humans deciding what content is going into the corpora that inform our automatic translation approach. So in the manual process that we've been following to build corpora, the very first step is corpus curation, where the linguistic team curates a corpus in the generative artificial intelligence domain, collecting high quality content that was originally written in each target language or source language. The languages that we're working on for version 2 of this system are English, Spanish, Mandarin, Chinese, and Swahili. A critical requirement at this stage is that all of the content that we include in our corpora must be original compositions. We do not want to include translations. We're not including translations because we want to ensure that authentic language patterns and cultural context are reflected in the corpora that are informing our automatic translation approach. There's all sorts of reasons why we don't want to include translations within our corpora. This is sort of a best practice of corpora designed for the purposes of terminology extraction. Any expert in the field of terminology or terminography will tell you that when you're building corpora for the purposes of terminology extraction, you do not include translations because translations are not a reflection of how an individual would write organically. It's somebody specifically taking up the challenge of taking the words that someone else wrote organically and trying to convey the core of the main ideas via another language that has its own, that reflects the cultural systems of the societies that use the language, and therefore translations just don't reflect organic writing patterns. There's also great studies that have been done, or one great study that's sort of crucial to this project as well, and that's a study by Mona Baker. Mona Baker has a great paper on the challenges that lie ahead when using corpora to study the patterns in translations. From corpora or a corpus, I'm not sure if she looked at one or multiple that she studied. She noted that there's some characteristics that translations tend to have. Translations tend to make implicit information overly explicit. They tend to eliminate nuance. Translations tend to use unnecessarily simplified language. They tend to mimic destination language structures to an exaggerated degree. And they tend to take a safe middle road between free and literal translation. So these are reasons why we don't want to include translations in our corpora. The other issue is that most publicly available translations were also produced sentence by sentence, which imposes the source language structures onto target languages and creates writing that doesn't reflect how content is naturally produced in the destination language. To understand this, we just have to think about how traditional translation technology works, where you have content that was written organically within the translation technology. That content is forced into a very rigid sentence by sentence structure that can't be reorganized to reflect how the target language speakers would expect to see the language presented. And so we just don't want to use translations for those reasons. And for anyone who has questions on that, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to talk about that at great length. So when we're thinking about, for folks on the linguistic team who are helping to build version 2 of the Pragmatic Auto-Translator, we're going to each be navigating unique language challenges as we're working on building the corpora for our languages. I'm going to be taking the lead on building the English corpus, and we have team members taking the lead on building the corpora in Spanish, Mandarin Chinese, and Swahili. So we're each going to face unique language challenges as we go about building our corpora. Some universal challenges that we're going to encounter. First of all, like I said, we need to avoid translations in content included in the corpus. We'll also want to try to avoid including content generated by artificial intelligence in the content that we're including in the corpus. We want to make sure that we have high quality content that was written organically, not as a translation by individual human writers. Other universal challenges that we're going to have, we may encounter really high quality writing that we want to include, but it's not publicly available. Sort of the approach that I've been taking is that if somebody, has published something publicly and it's accessible online, I'm taking that as sort of implicit permission to include the content in my corpora. For private content, for example, Slater has some really great research on generative AI that's behind a paywall that I might want to include. And so if I find content that's behind a paywall, it's just a matter of taking the time to reach out to the person who is the copyright holder, who is the intellectual property holder of that content to see, hey, can I include this in this system that I'm building? And people might be okay with that. But we do need to get explicit permission if we're wanting to include content that's behind some sort of a paywall. And if the person says no, then we don't include their content in the system. We'll also want to make sure that we're building our corpora strategically. That is starting from a nucleus of information that is central to thinking about generative AI broadly. So these would include topics like the history of AI, general definitions about AI, the ethics of AI. And once we have a good nucleus, we can expand out from there into specialized areas within the domain. For example, applied generative AI to different fields like to education, law, medicine, etc. So I just wanted to do a little bit of a demonstration of what it looks like to include content, search for content and include it in the corpora. So for example, I'm wanting to look for content on artificial, on generative artificial intelligence in Spanish. And I'm just going to do a search. So when thinking about what are the documents that I want to include in the corpus for Spanish, I need to have some ideas about the constraints that I have for my project. First of all, I would like to focus upon Spanish for Mexico, but it's likely that not enough content has been written in this language variant if my goal is to build a corpus of about 40 to 50 documents. That's sort of the baseline that we need to hit of the amount of content we have in our corpora per language in order to be able to start doing some evaluations on if the corpus-informed approach indeed produces better translation quality. So I'll probably need to expand to include Latin American Spanish, content written in Latin American Spanish. I'm trying to design an American system, a system that focuses on language as used in English and Spanish in the Americas first. And so if I do expand to include Latin American content, I'll want to make sure that no one Latin American variant is overrepresented. And after that, then I'll think about being very strategic about including documents as well from Spain, focusing on documents that are just really, really central and important to the understanding of the field of generative AI. So those are the constraints that I have for the Spanish and the English languages specifically. And in fact, I think one of our universal challenges is going to be building a corpus of 40 to 50 documents in each of the project languages. That's kind of a challenge, right? That's quite a few documents. So if I go through here and I understand the constraints that I've given myself for the Spanish content that I want to include in the corpus, that helps guide me on the types of content that I will want to collect and potentially include. So for example, if I'm seeing this first PDF, um, I'm seeing from the language code here that this is from Spain. So this is not an item that I immediately want to include in my corpus. I'd like to get some more Latin American content before shifting to including a few items from Spain. Next, here's a document that's about the new reality of education given advances in generative artificial intelligence. This one is about Gen AI applied to education. So, like I said, I want to start with a nucleus and then expand out to areas where generative AI is applied to specific fields. So this one's being applied to a specific field. And I'd first like to build my nucleus of documents. So I don't immediately want to include this document. Next, I have content from Columbia. It's got an edu in its URL, so I feel like it's probably more trustworthy if it's coming from a university. And so this one is talking about, it's looking at free versions, free online versions of generative AI systems. Maybe I'll open this one up and just see what it's about because it's meeting a lot of the requirements that I have for the project. Um, Here I'm seeing that it comes from a book, perhaps. I'm going to open up a PDF and see like how many pages that I have. I have 26 pages here where I'm looking at the abstract now. This one looks like a good article to me because it's talking in general about artificial intelligence, about technological revolutions, the ethics of the technology, and knowledge management. So this one looks like a good one to include. I think I'm going to save this one to include it later. I'll just go through the list and see if I can identify a couple more items that would be good ones to include. Here's another one from Colombia. I don't want to, as I said, I want to make sure that I'm not having a single Latin American variant overrepresented. So since I have a document from Colombia here already, I'm going to skip documents from Colombia for a while. Maybe my next round, when I look for the next, like, maybe I'll look for 5 documents this time, and in the next round, I'll look for 5 more documents. Maybe at that point, I'll be ready to add another document from Colombia, but for now, I'm going to keep moving on. This one's another one where it's from Mexico, so that's wonderful, but it's on university education specifically, so I don't want to include that. Here's another one on Gen AI in education specifically, in the discipline of communication. So I just need to keep going because I would like to establish my nucleus first. Mm, there's a lot of documents, a lot of research it seems to have been done recently on Gen AI applied to education. This one might be an interesting one. Generative artificial intelligence and like intelligent learning. Since it's IO, I don't know exactly where it's come from. Let's see. But I think this is actually, is this the exact same? No, this was one I found last time. Let's see. Ah, this is downloading. Let's see what we get. This one's from Spain, so I don't quite want to include it yet. Maybe I'll save it for later though. A disruptive context for the access of information. This could be an interesting one. Let's just go take a look. We'll give that a little time to download and we'll go to the next page. Here's in journalism, the use of intelligence, generative artificial intelligence in processes of disinformation. That would be an interesting one to include later. Let's go check out that document that just got downloaded. This one's another one from Spain, so I don't want to quite include this yet. This one is from Spain as well. That one I might save as one to include because I like the topic. It's how journalists are talking about generative AI. I like that topic. So I might include, if I were to include, the first Spain document I include might be this one. Not this one. Let's see, the one about journalists, this one. Don't want that one. So here I've got two documents that I want to include. Here's one from Ecuador, but it's once again on university education. Here's how Mexican teachers view artificial intelligence, published by Paraguay. That's very interesting. A lot of documents on education. This one seems interesting from Argentina on creating artificial societies using generative AI. That one is one I might want to give a closer look before deciding if I include it in the corpus or not. This one I think is interesting as well. It's talking about deep fakes and sort of the dangers of generative AI. Let's see if I can find one more document that I'd like to do a closer review of. If I'm finding that I'm having a hard time locating a specific document, I can do some more targeted searches. Like let's say I want to target documents from Mexico specifically. What I might do is do a specific search where I'm stating that I want, on the topic of generative artificial intelligence, I want it to come from UNAM, the National Autonomous University of Mexico. It's a very well-known group of universities here in Mexico, so there might be some good content from them, and then I want a PDF. So let's try that one and let's do Inteligencia Artificial and Generativa. In fact, UNAM they're doing a lot of research on generative AI from previous research that I've done. A lot of them are covering education though, and I don't quite want to include applied generative AI content yet. This one sounds interesting. Machines that write our fantasies and the humanities. I kind of like the name of that topic because there's a lot of people advocating for the inclusion of more people in the humanities in the development of generative AI, that we need to bring in a broad range of perspectives into the development of these types of systems, including philosophers, people who work in the humanities, just so there's more of a comprehensive approach to the development of these tools. And in fact, I've already collected this document into my corpus for Spanish at a when I did a previous round of looking for content. So here I found it again. I think that's plenty for now, but I guess a few things I would like to say just to close this presentation. Um, for each language we're working on, we're going to have unique constraints. For English, when I'm working on the English corpus, I'm at an advantage because so much research on AI comes from the Silicon Valley, and English tends to be a lingua franca of scientific communication. Um, a thing I'll need to be aware of is that I don't want to exclude quality content because it's not been written in English for the United States. So I'll need to come up with mechanisms for overcoming that. And if you're working on this project and you come up with an idea, I've shared ideas on the constraints that I'm facing when I think about building corpora for English and Spanish. In the slides that have here, I've also added constraints that have been shared with me for the two other project languages that we're working on. So I won't talk about those here since they're not my ideas. They're ideas that, team members shared with me, and those who are working on the project can access this set of slides to review those challenges. And if you're working on corpus building for this project and you come across the challenge, either a universal one or one that is related to your language specifically, please do add it to this set of slides so that we can learn about corpus building together. And I just want to share that adding this knowledge to the slides is really important because it's important that we have strategies in place to build high quality corpora for all of the languages of the project that we're working on. And one of the problems with a lot of technological systems is that they're built for English, and then the way that the system works for the English language is sort of forced upon every other language. Here, we want to build a system that takes into account the uniqueness of each of the languages that we're working with, and we want to build strategically around that.